The only one of us, added he, who goes out and may say his go, and he has been stopped upwards 50 times. Had I been in his place, the same thing would have happened to me. Once during the admiral's time I was stopped, but he instantly metteva l'isola sotto sopra, turned the island topsy-turvy on account of it, and I clearly saw that he was really displeased and that he took every precaution to prevent the recurrence of a similar circumstance. Now this brute would, on the contrary, be pleased with it, or with anything else that would have a tendency to lessen or to degrade my character. I am well convinced, added Napoleon, that the barbarous manner in which I am treated will be revenged by the blood of some innocent Englishman, by the arguments and doctrines of your ministers, that it is useful to keep me here. Every act, however atrocious, may be justified. Would it not have been useful to me to have procured the assassination of Nelson or Wellington? Would it not now be useful to the French nation to get rid of all the Allied troops by poisoning the bread and the water? Would it not be useful to them to assassinate Wellington? It is not the utility of an act which is to be considered, but its justice. For by the former principle, every species of crime may be apparently justified as being useful and therefore necessary. It is the doctrine of Talleyrand. Soon after this, Sir Hudson Lowe came to Longwood, and having made some inquiries respecting Napoleon's health, asked if I had had any particular conversation with him upon the subject of his complaint. In reply, I communicated to him the foregoing conversation, avoiding the repetition of the epithet Bureau, executioner. His Excellency called Major Goroker to be a witness to some parts of it, that about Lord Amherst, which he said he did not believe, and the intentions which Napoleon attributed to certain persons, and asked if I had made a reply. I said no. He observed that a reply might easily have been made if I had been disposed to do so, but that it appears I was of the same way of thinking as General Bonaparte asserted Lord Amherst had been, and asked if such were the case. I answered that as a medical man, I had strongly recommended Napoleon to take exercise on horseback. This did not satisfy Sir Hudson Lowe, who in an angry tone and manner repeated his question. I replied that as my opinion, when given in reply to his questions, had latterly caused so much anger, I must beg leave to decline giving any, unless upon medical subjects, that moreover my opinion was of little consequence, adding that as a medical man I had strongly recommended exercise. This reply greatly displeased Sir Hudson Lowe, who observed that it was in vain to expect any good thing from a person possessed of such sentiments, that he had no confidence in any person about General Bonaparte. After a tolerable long harangue, in which he accused Napoleon of having crammed the ambassador's head with calumnies and purposely delayed seeing him until the day before his departure in order that he, Sir Hudson, might not have an opportunity of refuting them, he concluded by saying, "Do you not think, sir, that General Bonaparte has treated me most shamefully in that business?" I replied that Napoleon had been so unwell as not to be in a situation to receive strangers, that until the last moment he had been undecided whether to receive his lordship or not, and that Lord Amherst had been at his, Sir Hudson's, house for several days, during which he must have had ample opportunities of making his lordship acquainted with every particular. And if I was rightly informed, Lord Amherst had seen and conversed with him for some hours after his lordship had with Napoleon, with whom he had been only about 2 hours. This reply excited his Excellency's wrath, who, looking at me with an expression of countenance I shall never forget, said, "If it were not that it would be made a subject to complaint, I should immediately, and without waiting the orders of government, send you off the island, sir. I have received no official intelligence from government concerning your appointment. You are not of my choosing. You are only permitted to visit General Bonaparte as a medical man." I observed that I was acting according to his own instructions by confining myself to medical subjects. He repeated his threat of sending me off the island, to which I answered by telling him that a dismissal from St. Helena would not give me the smallest uneasiness. After this, Sir Hudson went down to Count Bertrand's, where he remained about half an hour. On his return, he sent for me, and after saying that General Bonaparte had been represented by Count Bertrand to be in a much worse state of health than I had mentioned, ordered me to send him a written report of his health. About 4 o'clock, Count Belmain, with Baron and Madame Sturmer, came as far as the inner gate of Longwood. met General and Madame Bertrand, who with little Arthur and a servant were walking out. Shortly afterwards, General Montsalon joined them. They remained together for nearly an hour, walking between the guardroom and the inner gate. It was amusing to observe the gestures of Sir Thomas Reed, who was all the time standing at or moving before Captain Blakeney's door with a telescope in his hand, especially at a time when a thick fog came on which completely obscured them from the knight's view, who was vainly endeavoring to penetrate it with his glass. Sir Hudson Lowe's visit to Count Bertrand, I am informed, was to offer that a soldier's barrack should be put up at Longwood for Napoleon to walk under, as a substitute for the deficiency of continuous shade. Some conversation also took place about the restrictions, in which observation of a nature similar to those of Napoleon to me in the morning were made to Sir Hudson Lowe by Count Bertrand, who also informed his excellency of the opinion expressed by Lord Amherst. Saw Napoleon in the evening. He was in much the same state as the morning, told me that he had seen Madame Sturber through his glass, and passed some commendations upon the rosy bloom of her cheeks. 29th. Signal made for Captain Blakeney to proceed to Plantation House. Sent my report to Napoleon's health by him, and made application for some sea water to be sent to Longwood for a bath for the use of Napoleon. Saw Napoleon, who was in much better spirits. He had eaten freely of antiscorbutics. His gums were a little better, the lower extremities nearly the same in point of size, but not so painful. Had a jocular conversation with him about patron saints. He asked who was my patron saint, what was my Christian name. I replied that my first was a family name, that I was called after Barry, Lord Avonmore, an Irish peer. But, said he, laughing, you must have some patron saint to befriend you and plead your cause in the next world. I mentioned my second Christian name. Ah, said he, then he will plead for you. Saint Napoleon ought to be very much obliged to me and do everything in his power for me in the world to come. Poor fellow, nobody knew him before. He had not even a day in the calendar. I got him one and persuaded the Pope to give him the 15th of August, my birthday. I recollect, continued he, when I was in Italy, a priest preaching about a poor sinner who had departed this life. His soul appeared before God, and he was required to give an account of all his actions. The evil and the good were afterwards thrown into opposite scales in order to see which preponderated. That containing the good proved much the lightest, and instantly flew up to the beam. His poor soul was condemned to the infernal regions, conducted by angels to the bottomless pit, delivered over to devils, and thrown into the flames. Already, said the preacher, had the devouring element covered his feet and legs, and proceeded upwards, even unto his bowels and his vitals. Oh, brethren, he felt them. He sunk, and only his head appeared above the waves of fire, when he cried out to God, and afterwards to his patron, saying, Oh, patron, said he, look down upon me. Oh, take compassion upon me. Throw into the scale of my good deeds all the lime and stone, and which I gave to repair the convent of light. His saint instantly took the hint, gathered together all the lime and stone, threw them into the scale of good, which immediately preponderated. The scale of evil sprung up to the beam, and the sinner's soul its paradise at the same moment. Now you see by this, brethren, how useful it is to keep the convents in repair. For had it not been for the lime and stone bestowed by this sinner, his poor soul would even now, children, be consuming in hellfire. And yet you are so blind as to let the convent and the church, built by your forefathers, fall to ruin. All this time, continued he, laughing, these Kennelly wanted to get a new convent built, and had recourse to this expedient to procure money, which after this poured in upon them from all quarters. Napoleon then began to rally me about my profession. You medical people, said he, will have more lives to answer for in the other world than even we generals. What will you have to say for yourself, said he, laughing, when you are called to account for all the souls of poor sailors you have dispatched to the other world? Or what will your saint say for you when the accusing angel proclaims such a number you sent out of the world by giving them heating medicines, when you ought to have given cooling ones, vice versa? So many more because you mistook their complaints and bled them too much, others because you did not bleed them enough, numbers because they were conniving, you did not pay them as much attention as you would have done to the captain or the admiral, and because you were over your bottle, or at the theater, or with a fine girl, and did not like to be disturbed, or after drink in English when you went and distributed medicines. Dritto a torto. Right and wrong. How many, because you were not present at the time a change in the complaint took place, when a medicine given at the moment might have saved them? How many others, because the provisions were bad and you were not, complained for fear of offending the fournisseurs? I replied by observing that on the score of conscience I was perfectly easy in my mind, that human nature was liable to error. Very likely I had made mistakes, but not intentional ones, nor had I ever paid less attention to the canaille than to the officers, and endeavored as much as possible, as I perceived that he was half in earnest, to uphold the honor of my profession. I also explained to him that in our service the surgeons could gain nothing by not complaining of the fournisseurs. Napoleon answered that certainly a man ought always to be judged by his intentions, but that there were abuses in all departments, which were principally kept up by people being either interested or afraid to complain. That he had endeavored to eradicate them as much as possible, in which he had effected much, but had not been able perfectly to succeed. My opinion, continued he, is that physicians kill as many as we generals. When they dispatch a number of souls to the other world, either through ignorance, mistake, or not having properly examined their complaint, they are just as cool and as little concerned as the general, with whom I am acquainted, who lost 3,000 men in storming a hill. Having succeeded after several desperate attempts, he observed with great sang-froid, "Oh, it was not this hill I wanted to take, it was another. This is of no utility," and returned back again to his former position. I remarked that it appeared he thought physicians to be as bad as ignorant as they are described to be in Moliere or Gil Blas. He laughed and said, "I believe that there are a great many of Moliere's physicians. Of surgery I have quite a different opinion, as there you do not work in the dark. There you at least have daylight and your senses to guide and assist you. You recollect having heard of Sieyès?" I replied in the affirmative. "Sieyès," continued he, "before the Revolution, was almoner to one of the princesses. One day, when he was performing mass in the chapel before herself, her attendants, and a large congregation, something occurred which made the princess get up and retire. Her example was followed by her ladies in waiting, and by the whole of the nobility, officers, and others who attended more out of complaisance to her than from any true sense of religion. Sieyès was very busy reading his breviary, and for some time did not perceive it. Lifting up his eyes, however, from his book, Lowe, he observed that the princess, nobles, and all the others, comme il faut, had disappeared. With an air of displeasure and contempt, he shut the book, hastily descended from the pulpit, exclaiming, "I do not say mass for the canaille," and went out of the chapel, leaving the service half finished. "Now," said he, laughing very heartily, "many of you physicians would leave a patient half cured because he was one of the canaille." He then spoke of Lowe. "Lowe," said he, "was the most honest man and the best friend to the soldier that I ever knew, vigilant and indefatigable in his exertions for the wounded. Lowe was seen on the field of battle after an action, accompanied by a train of young surgeons endeavoring to discover if any signs of life remained in the bodies. In the most inclement weather and at all times of the night and the day, Lowe was to be found amongst the wounded. He scarcely allowed a moment's repose to his assistants, and kept them eternally at their posts. He tormented the generals and disturbed them out of their beds at night whenever he wanted accommodations or assistance for the wounded or sick. They were all afraid of him, as they knew he would instantly come and make a complaint to me. He paid court to none of them, and was the implacable enemy of the fournisseurs." Speaking about the service on board a ship of war at sea during the winter, especially of a certain class, I remarked that the seamen were better off in point of being able to warm themselves at a fire than the officers. "Why so?" said Napoleon. I replied, "Because they have the advantage of a galley fire, where they can warm and dry themselves." "And why not the officers?" I said that it would not be exactly decorous for the officers to mix in that familiar way with the men. "Ah, la morgue aristocratique, la rage aristocratique," exclaimed Napoleon. "Why, in my campaigns I used to go to the lines of the bivouacs, sit down with the meanest soldier, converse, laugh, and joke with him. I always prided myself on being l'homme du peuple, the the man of the people. I observed that a man in his exalted situation might do without impropriety that which, if done by an inferior officer, especially on board of a ship, might produce too much familiarity, perhaps contempt, and thereby relaxation of discipline. La morgue aristocratique, cried Napoleon again. You are the most aristocratical nation in the world. Had I been one of those principiotti in Germany, your oligarchy would never have sent me here, because je suis l'homme du peuple, because I may say that I raised myself from the canaille to the greatest heights of power without the aid of the aristocracy, hereditary rights, because the long line of nobles or petty princes did not distinguish my name, because in fact I was not one of them. They determined to oppress and humiliate me when in their power. Lords Bathurst and Castlereagh, de Canaille, de l'aristocracy are the persons who have ordered all these attempts. John Bull will comprehend that I am oppressed, parce que je suis du peuple, in order to prevent any of them from presuming to elevate themselves to a level with the aristocracy. He concluded by observing that the governor always took a witness with him to Bertrand's for the purpose, he supposed, of testifying to everything that he thought proper to assert. That, in all probability, he made a process verbal as he liked, and got the other to sign it. That, therefore, to prevent his making conversations, he had ordered Bertrand to write an official letter to him, stating their grievances and what they wanted. 30th. Napoleon, much in the same state, went to Plantation House to report, found that Sir Hudson Lowe had gone out, met him at Longwood on my return, informed him of the state of Napoleon's health, and in reply to some of his observations told him that there was nothing immediately dangerous, but that swellings of the extremities taking place with a man in Napoleon's time of life and of his temperament and present habits were always to be looked upon with a suspicious eye. As such were frequently the primary symptoms of dropsy.